Chapter 2. Interview with an Archbishop. At that time, there was a radio show hosted by Alan Colmes who broadcasted from WNBC Radio in New York City. I was a big fan of Alan Colmes. I listened to the show every day after work. One late afternoon, as I was listening to the broadcast, Alan was interviewing Kreskin, the famous psychic and mind reader. Alan had the phone lines lit up because Kreskin had asked the question, "Has anybody out there ever experienced a miracle?" Weirdly enough, I actually thought about calling in. I knew it would be almost impossible to get through, plus I was afraid. But I was young and idealistic, so I gave it a try. And almost miraculously, I got through to the call screener, who after a 10-minute wait, put me in touch with Alan live on the air. I was so frightened, but Alan was so nice. He really is a gentleman. I told my purple flash story to Alan, Kreskin, and a radio audience of potentially millions. I don't know if you have ever called into a radio talk show. I can report that it's quite a nerve-wracking experience. It sounds easy, but once they say you're live on air and you know millions of people are listening to you, you get nervous. But I told the purple flash story, and it was well received by Alan, Kreskin, and the large radio audience. As I was telling the story to Alan and his listeners, I accidentally mentioned the name of the church where the miracle occurred. Well, it just so happened that the Archbishop of my archdiocese was listening to the program. The Archbishop was a big Alan Colmes fan too, just like me. The Archbishop was also a Kreskin fan. It was a hot show. When I got on the air and told my story and innocently divulged the name of the church where this electrical flash occurred, the Archbishop wanted to meet this tabernacular flash producer who was a parishioner at a church in his province. The power of the media is impressive. It made somebody as insignificant as me appear important enough to get the Archbishop's attention. With his curiosity activated, the Archbishop called my pastor. You met him before, Priest B. The Archbishop told Priest B that he wanted to meet me. Priest B's secretary called me and told me the good news. I was informed of the Archbishop's request for a vocation interview. Of course, I jumped at the chance. Are you kidding me? You bet I did. The vocations meeting was arranged. This would be my opportunity to get out of the engraving and metal scraping business and work with my beloved Tabernacle. Whether consciously or subconsciously, you are probably already developing a personality profile on me. I realize that self-revelation manifests itself in multiple ways in a story like this. I have claimed that I have spoken to a tabernacle, and the tabernacle responded with a purple flash, and a priest who was hiding behind the tabernacle, unbeknownst to me, came out from behind the tabernacle, swinging, so to speak. He stared angrily at me. That's what I'm saying, and that's all that I am saying. But if you think talking to tabernacles is crazy, I think I can top even that. Because this part of the story cannot be so easily explained by sane, rational people such as yourself. I took this purple flash episode and made it pay off big for me. I took this so-called imaginary purple flash story and inserted it into a cold-hearted bureaucratic church system and overcame it. Here is what happened. The interview was to take place at the vocations office, just a 30-minute drive from me, in a beautiful suburban location. I learned that the interview would be conducted by a group of 3 priests, Jesuits, in the vocations office. Oh no, Jesuits! If these guys heard my purple flash story from the Archbishop, they would not be impressed in the least. They probably weren't that happy that the Archbishop circumvented their hiring process in the first place. Jesuits are like that, authoritarian. They thought the Archbishop pulled this candidate, me, out of thin air. I'm sure they laughed at my resume. I did not go to college and I had no theological training whatsoever. I was probably the first glyphologist they ever interviewed. Anyway, I got the interview. That's the important thing. But there's something else I must tell you. I wanted this job bad, but I wanted it on my terms. I was going to be an old-fashioned priest. The Mass was going to be the center of my life. It's called being a simplex priest, and that's what I wanted to be. No confessions, no baptisms, and most especially no weddings. Presiding at the Mass would be my only functional task. It was a non-negotiable job requirement. Accordingly, I had practically zero chance of getting the job. I was a very weak candidate walking into that interview, and I had an outrageous job demand to boot. It finally arrived, February 22nd, 1983, the interview day. I drove my car into the long driveway and parked it right up front. I remember looking up at this huge former seminary with its attached Gothic-style church building, all nestled in a gigantic field pasture which dwarfed the holy structure. I also remember that there were only 4 or 5 cars in the driveway. The place looked dead, to be honest with you, like its glory days had passed. I stepped out of the car, closed the door, and stepped onto an ice patch which sent me airborne 3 feet off the ground. Then, after being suspended in midair, I dropped like a sack of potatoes straight down hard onto the frozen asphalt. By some miracle of coordination that to this day I don't know how I did it, I was able to, with my heel and elbow and arching my back perfectly, land without harm. I got up, dusted some icy frost off my pant leg, and I walked into the interview. I put the traumatic incident behind me and made believe it never happened. Remember, I don't allow looking like a jackass to emotionally affect me. I'm a simplex, so looking foolish is second nature. It happens to me all the time. If I let that affect me, I would never get anything done. Let me tell you something. That midwinter somersault on the unforgiving asphalt would have ruined any other man's chances of performing well in an interview. But I barely got my hair mussed. I could have been killed. So with a gay and light heart, I entered the intimidating seminary/church structure. I was directed to a large conference room down the hall. When I walked into the room, I saw 3 priests comfortably sitting at a long conference table. Also, I saw other men in the room, all approximately my age, seated in chairs waiting to be grilled by the Jesuits. Unfortunately, and unbeknownst to me, I had been invited by the Archbishop to a gang interview for the priest job opening. No one told me it would be a gang interview. This interview format was a dirty trick. It meant that even if I did well, my chances were slim to none for getting a job offer. My anger increased as the interview developed. I'll spare you the details, but it consisted of a panel of crusty priests firing random, semi-relevant, and often abstruse questions at us. This process would not produce the best candidate, no way, so I decided to take matters into my own hands. About halfway through the interview, I just could not take it anymore. I determined that I was being far outclassed by these other candidates. They were smarter, stronger, better looking, and they all had great teeth. They had the whole package. So quite out of the blue, I did something that was way out of my comfort zone. As you know, I have a reputation. I talk to tabernacles, and sometimes my body moves in a 4-step process that conjures up the Holy Spirit. So in the middle of another candidate's answer to an interviewer's question, I suddenly bolted upright from my seat, step 1, and walked to the center of the conference room, step 2, purposely making myself the center of everyone's attention. Step 3, when all eyes had fallen on me and the room was silenced, I spoke loudly and authoritatively the following words. I wish to proclaim here that I have achieved visible electric effluences by a willed balance of external and internal sun energies. I then stood there frozen like a statue. I stood there, in the middle of the conference room, probably for 20 long seconds. The interview room became uncomfortably silent, and the discomfort grew the longer I remained silent. It was a critical psychological moment in the negotiation for this job. And make no mistake about it, this was a negotiation, and I had just seized control. The other candidates there did not know what was going on. I had executed a risky, go-for-broke negotiation tactic. I had taken over the interview process. The tension in the room grew and grew until something had to give. A heavy, embarrassing silence pressed in on everyone. We had reached that pivotal moment in any negotiation where the rule is this: the first person to speak loses. The Archbishop slowly rose and said, "Mr. Duffy, thank you for that theological profundity. As a reward for your grace under pressure, next month I will consecrate you a priest with singular faculty. This ordination will occur at the Basilica, and I will personally administer the sacrament to you." "Congratulations, son. When can you start?" I screamed like a college girl who had just won a beauty pageant. The interview was over. I had vanquished my worthy competition for the job. The losers exited the conference room, each with a disappointed look on their face. These chumps had just learned rule number 1 in the Catholic clerical business. It's a tough racket. Leave the tears and beads at home for your grandmother. I was left in the room with the Archbishop and a couple of his team members. I signed an open-ended multi-archdiocesan employment contract, complete with a nice sign-on bonus. The strategy I deployed in that interview was inspired. I'm convinced it came from another world. I'm not that smart. I think my impromptu improvisation is worthy of an acting award. But I mustn't gloat. That negotiation ploy was not as inspired or as lucky as you might think. I came to the interview through the auspices of Priest B. Remember him, he was my sponsor. That means something to these professional clerical celibates. He and I had a purple flash together. Priest B probably personally confirmed the purple flash to the Archbishop. Unbeknownst to me, I had walked into that gang interview with a halo effect. So ostensibly, I was the dark horse candidate, but in actuality, maybe I was the golden boy candidate. When I made the bold Sun Energies proclamation, I was spouting nonsense to the candidates. They must have thought I was nuts. But to the hiring authorities, the Jesuits, it sounded like I was revealing an insider's secret. I had somehow spoken a shibboleth, a secret code, a password, which only insiders like the priests know about.